Okay, so we've discussed the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made for a much more stable world um, economy. And we've gone over the fact that the world was destroyed, and therefore there was a lot of money that the United States could invest abroad. You probably know that we initiated the Marshall Plan. Now, if you were to translate the tens of millions of dollars that constituted the Marshall Plan, money that was given away free to Europe, especially the major nations, it would amount to the hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars today. Why did the government give away that money free? Well, it's very easy. There was a nice tacit agreement going on. Your economies are wrecked. It's going to take you quite a while before you can even begin to compete on the level that the United States economy generates wealth. But we'll make a little deal with you, okay? You are not to charge high tariffs on any of our exports to you. You're not to do that. We'll allow you to, charge minimal tariffs, but in other words, we want more or less complete freedom to sell our automobiles, our furniture, our electronic equipment. In those days it's TVs and radios, etc., to sell them over your borders. Now that in turn is not such a terrible thing for Europe while it's rebuilding its own capacity to produce its own goods, because they were able to set up a huge retail sector, and therefore they would buy things from the United States wholesale and sell them at a profit. And so the sales sector gave employment to, for instance, French people right away. And you also have to know that the countries of Europe were still more rural on the whole than in the United States, and so farming was still a fairly large occupation, though it did definitely take Europe a way to rise out of recessionary conditions and to actually get back to the level of economy it was at before the beginning of World War II. Now, the United States had already achieved that because, as you know, before the Great Depression really ended, well, actually, I can tell you that the growth rate in the United States during the entire 1930s was 1.3%. They never stopped calling it the Great Depression, even though technically there was this 1.3% average growth going on. By the way, it has been projected, I believe it's by Moody's, that in the third quarter of this year, the annualized growth of the United States of America was 1.4%, not very far above the average that occurred during the Great Depression. Okay, and on top of everything, people saved money like crazy during World War II. We had 100% employment because the expense of World War II of producing uniforms, boots, not to mention the incredible amount of machinery and airplanes and battleships and so forth, and really concentrating the economy on that sector, actually to the detriment of consumer goods. There were less consumer goods than there were formerly. And so what happened? American workers were able to save net 25% of all their earnings. That would be a dream for all of us, wouldn't it? To be able to net 25% of our earnings and invest it or put it away in the bank. Not too bad a deal. So in any event, that was what was going on with the Marshall Plan, and it was extremely profitable to the United States for the reasons that I have explained, and that's why that free money was given away. You do hear reactionaries all the time talking about how ungrateful countries like France are because we rescued them for free. Well, the United States made tremendous profits that far exceeded the investment of the free money that they put into France. By 1953, the United States of America manufactures both in light and heavy industry, and will include other industries such as the extractive ones, mining and so forth. The United States generates over 60% of the world's goods and services that are for sale. So this gives you a real idea of the incredible hegemony of the United States economically. The height of the U.S. economy occurs in the 1960s. It does not grow as fast as it did during World War II. World War II was a real anomaly. But in the 60s, depending on who your statistical source is, and in the next segment we are going to put up some charts so you can get some a good eye view of what the rise and decline of the U.S. economy has been. During the 1960s, the growth rate was between 4.4 and 4.6%. That compares, say, with the growth rate of the 2000s up to 2008, which stands at roughly 2.1%. And as you know, again, right now we're going through less growth than that. And as I mentioned in the last talk, it's agreed among many economists that in order for an economy to produce enough jobs for new workers coming into the workforce, i.e. minors who become adults, as well as people who have lost their jobs here and there and need to transfer over and find other jobs, that you really need to have 2% growth. In other words, to have fairly full employment. But that's not happening. So in any event, the height of the U.S. economy is in the 1960s. And I would say further that probably the absolute height of U.S. prosperity occurred in 1966 or 1968. There's some debate about that. What further happens is that Europeans are not stupid. They have their own economists, their own high-quality think tanks, their own very high-quality universities. And what they saw was that after either 1966 or 68, and certainly by the very early 70s, they began to realize that U.S. profit rates were going down. Why were U.S. profit rates going down? It was because Europe was starting to catch up. Europe was developing capital goods, that is, machinery and what's needed to produce its own goods at a cost that was competitive with the United States. And the United States went from manufacturing over 60% of the world's goods to where we are now, where it's well under 1/4 of the world's goods. Europe simply started the catch-up phase in the 1970s, and it was then, for example, that we started to see more Japanese automobiles. People must remember Datsun, which is now Nissan, and there was a lot of Toyota. Civics hadn't come in, and the Japanese were really expanding with electronics, with boom boxes, etc., with televisions that were actually better than the ones in the United States. And this then became fully evident in the following decade, in the 1980s. And people, their morale was in the dumps, and they welcomed Ronald Reagan with open arms because he sounded such an optimistic message. And Americans who already were feeling their standard of living lower, and I should go into that right now. European competition became so effective, and they realized that their economies would one day perhaps surpass the U.S. economy in productivity. They basically came to conclude that, whoa, the dollar is weakening, and more countries demanded to be paid in gold, okay, for the imports that they sent to the United States. In other words, the goods that they exported to the United States. And by, the world's gold dwindled. Hitherto, currency systems in world history were always based on precious metals or precious minerals. In some cases, it was diamonds. What happened was there was what they called Bretton Woods II. And I will post some charts for you.